Okay, I see that we're already 60 in the attendee list. I suggest that we start kicking already. First of all, thank you everyone for being here. I hope everyone is doing fine and your families and friends too. Um, let's talk brand recovery series, and I'm gonna pass the word to Wim immediately to start kicking. Thank you and welcome.
All right, thank you, Thibaud. For me too. Thank you very much for joining. You are quite a big crowd, so that's really cool for our first webinar. I hope you're all safe and sound, and your family too. And so yeah, so this is the brand recovery series. What is it? It's a blog that we've started this week. And as you can see on the screenshot of the blog, so the goal of the brand recovery series is basically we are in this economical, health, and mental or psychological crisis, and we're all marketeers, and we're all figuring out what to do now and what to do next, and and nobody knows what's going to happen basically. And so, because nobody knows, there's no right answers, but we all have opinions, we all have insights, we all read a lot about what the experts are saying. So we thought, well, let's bring all of this together and share knowledge, and then inspire each other with insights and stuff that we've read. And so that's why we started. And on the blog, you will find white papers, webinars like these, articles, point of views, interviews with thought leaders. I just finished an interview with Arlande Wood, who has written a book, Lemon, and he's talking about why are his insights very valuable for now. And then, of course, if you have stuff to share, please do so. So, okay, so my name is Wim. I'm the Director of Strategy at Eisenbar, and Thibaud is joining me. Thibaud?
Yeah, so I'm Thibaud. I've been working at Dance Regis Network for 7 years, and I'm now a strategic client lead on a few of our key accounts.
And he's very smart.
Thank you, Wim. Today, there's a few rules before we really start. You might have already understood that there's no sound from your end. This is a choice because we're giving you the knowledge today. Might we just ask not to post anything of your questions in the chat to avoid any crowded conversations, but just use the Q&A. It will be easier for us to go through it and to make sure that we answer at least some of your questions by the end. All of the questions will be obviously answered, but we might not be able to answer them all after this webinar. So please put them there so we can address them duly after the webinar. So let's get kicking. So when we first started this project on the brand recovery series, we took a hypothesis that like other crises, this crisis has or will have a specific impact on uncertainty. People are getting uncertain, which will eventually affect their consumer confidence, but ultimately also their purchase power. And when consumers are uncertain, we marketeers also feel it immediately, and it leaves us with a great feeling of powerlessness, but also with the urge to be really flexible in everything that we do. And what we see is that we start asking ourselves the question, how long will this crisis actually last? How is my consumer really impacted, and how is he impacting his or changing his behavior? And finally, what can we do as marketeers, as advertisers, to safeguard our brands, our business as a common goal? And so basically, these are the questions that we would like to answer today. Um, we went further into the analysis, and what we saw is that like in other crises, consumers tend to go through four phases. First phase is actually the crisis time itself. So this is the moment where we're in now. How do consumers react upon this, and how do brands need to communicate to these consumers in these times of crisis? But there will be obviously a moment that businesses will go back to business, so that companies will go back to business. Sorry, and that consumers will be able to access your products as before. Obviously, not maybe on the pace that they used to, because their consumer confidence will be affected, and that will need some time. So this is the phase three, the back to normal. How do brands react upon that, and how can we start going back to a mindset of boosting business growth? And then beyond, it's more of a philosophical idea. Basically, what it says is that when you there are always lingering trends that are surfaced by crisis disruption, and some of them will linger beyond and will on the long run become more important. And so this is basically the base of our framework, and which we want to address today and in the weeks to come. One of the crises that we analyzed, and obviously it's really difficult to compare crises, especially with this one, because this is an unprecedented one. But what we saw, and this is why we chose the angle of consumer confidence and purchase power, is actually when we had to look at the financial crisis in 2008, where we saw that consumer confidence dropped very high, and I'm on the top left curve right there, where we saw that consumer confidence dropped very steeply and then came back to a same point, but only after 3 years. The impact on purchase power, though, was more of a cascading effect. So before the purchase power was affected, we were already a bit further on the road. And this is something to be nuanced in this crisis, though. We expect that consumer confidence will drop like in 2008 and will need some time to recover. But we also think that purchase power is impacted more instantaneously, because logically businesses are shut down almost immediately. Employees are asked to go into temporary or partial unemployment, which impacts purchase power almost immediately. The only difficulty is to ask ourselves why or how is each and every phase going to last. And the reason for this is that this crisis is basically a very complex crisis. And I'm going to pass the word again to Wim, who has done a lot of research on it.
Yeah, so thank you, Thibaud. So the first thing is the health crisis. And there's a few things that we need to take into account. We basically all in scenario planning now, and it's very difficult because we have no idea what's going to come. But what we know is that the governments, basically all the governments, are in this suppression strategy. So keeping the curve as low as possible so that the health system doesn't break. But that's a suppression strategy, and so the problem, it's not a problem, but the consequence of that is that we're not building herd mentality. So basically, we will need to wait until the vaccine for all the restrictions to go away. The other important thing is that it's very likely that once we have the curve under control, and some of the restrictions will loosen up, and we will be back at work, back at the office, and our kids back to school, then it is very likely that we will have, because we don't have the herd immunity, that there will be new outbreaks. Hence, why you hear on the news that the government, is involved in those apps that will message us if we are, close to someone who is infected, and that's all to control the restrictions that will get loosened up, but not all at the same time, and that is all aimed at controlling local outbreaks. Of course, that can take until June, May, June, September. We don't know because it depends on when we will have the outbreak. So in your scenario planning, one thing is already sure that we will have probably will have a number of local outbreaks. And if you have a local outbreak, then restrictions will tighten up again. And so that's something we can't plan for that, but we need to take that into account for our scenario planning. The second thing is the economical crisis. So all the smart minds and the European economists, 82% of them agree that we will be hit by a recession. And a recession is, by recession is two quarters with negative growth. Um, for the people that have a little bit, like me, a little bit of gray hair, then you know what's happening in a recession. You know what it does to the consumer and to companies. But the thing that most economists are afraid of is the looping effect. So if we are a quarter into a recession and all of a sudden we have another big outbreak, then again we need to put the country on lockdown, and then that will make the recession worse. So that's what the many of the economists are really afraid of. It's the looping effect. And if the health crisis and the recession start to loop, then it's going to be really bad. Hopefully it's not. But then, the other thing, the third thing I want to mention is how long. So we have the health crisis, we have the economic crisis. How long will it take to recover? Again, nobody knows, but here are a few insights. This is the S&P 500 drawdowns. So drawdowns are investors taking their money out of the stock market. And as you can see, so we had drawdowns in 57, 62 until 2009 and 2018. And then next to that, you see the drawdown. We were March 12th, we were at 26. A few days later, we were at 31. So, and that's the negative peak. We were at 31. And then you see how long it took to recover. So basically the answer is we don't know, but it's going to take a long time. Bloomberg thinks it's going to take at least 6 months. So for scenario planning, it's difficult. We will have to show a lot of flexibility, because our scenario plannings will depend on, do you have a local outbreak? Do you have a national outbreak? What's going on in France and Holland, etc. And then the recession, how deep will the recession be? And then, on the stock market, how long will that take to recover? All right, Thibaud.
Thank you, Wim. But so we're also talking. This was actually to explain the framework which we will use during the coming weeks. So today we want to focus also on the time of crisis, which is the moment we're in now, and try to give you some routes on how to tackle this phase, this particular phase we're all in. Now, what we realized in our analyses was that basically what shapes what brands need to do today is the question if you are open for business or not. If you have an ability to sell either digitally or physically, or in physical point of sales, I mean, or not. And basically, if you ask yourself that question, what we see is that if you're able to sell, then there is an opportunity in continuing to communicate and maximize those short-term sales, basically. Obviously, if you're lowered in opportunity, meaning that with which I mean that if some sales channels are cut from your regular ecosystem, that you could focus on identifying those weaknesses and make sure that you can get your products as easily as possible to your consumers. For instance, focusing on partnerships with e-commerce players or having your own e-commerce platforms. If you're, however, not able to sell, then it's more of a vague and difficult equation to make. And what we see is that advertisers who are not able to sell have a sort of way out by keeping mental availability high and by investing in um, let's say strengthening their social license to operate and stay top of mind, because there will be a moment where brands that are not able to sell right now will be in the future, and at that point you want to be top of mind so people start purchasing your product and your services again. A final point, which is even more difficult, is to start thinking of when you identify, for instance, weaknesses, to start thinking of innovative projects that you can jumpstart to make sure that you're ready not only for the back to business phase, but make sure that in the end you will have the right ecosystem in place to go back to normal and think on business growth. However, it's quite difficult to make this equation because there's a lot of things changing with the consumer mindset right now because of different measures that's being taken by government and by companies. And I'm going to go through four of them today with you to show you how they affect their anxieties and how they are actually taking already the upper hand in reacting to it. First one is obviously social distancing and confinement. Well, we find people now home, they're locked down away from their families and friends, but basically this raises the anxiety and fear that some people cannot care for their loved ones anymore. If you have people in elderly homes, for instance, then it's difficult to get to them physically. Another point is when you're confined in one place for 24 hours, 7 days a week, and your office becomes your home, or your home becomes your office, depending on the perspective, then there is a chance that you fall in boredom. And how can you actually fight this boredom is something that people are working with. And as I said, they're already reacting to it in certain ways. First and foremost, people know they're home based, but they're trying to become active. So people can still go outside for a walk, for a run. And so you see that a lot of people tend to take on physical activity more than before. Next to that, they try to find new styles of at-home entertainment, making sure that they pick up new learnings, that new hobbies, maybe because they cannot exert their previous hobbies anymore. And finally, there is sort of rise of community resilience, with which I mean that um, there is a search for ways to become more solidary with other people through, for instance, messaging apps, through digital, to stay in contact with those communities that we want to be in and related to. A second point is government is closing stores for non-essential goods, and that's a difficult one because the question that raises with consumers is how can I actually access what I want, and if so, what is the danger that lockdown of stores will go further? And in that case, will there be enough for me? And so this has had a very big downside over the past few weeks, as we saw with consumer stockpiling. But then in general, what we see is that there's sort of a reduced spending in general, but that is for a part compensated by creating this homebound economy. So consumers are taking control of if they don't have what they want, they're gonna look for it online and they're gonna buy it online, which explains why e-commerce is booming right now. A third point is employment measures. So we see that a lot of companies are now forced to go in either temporary unemployment or partial unemployment or even full unemployment. And this is a very difficult one because this is touching upon the personal finances of households and families. And so it is basically raises the questions with people, will I be able to provide with my families? And so this, what we can see is that people are becoming very, very tough on their personal finances, which has an impact on a lot of industries like luxury, like fashion, like beauty. So this has a big impact on this type of spending. And finally, there's an information overload. When you open when you turn on your TV, when you pick up your smartphone, anything that you open, any app that you open will show something about COVID-19 or the coronavirus or measures that you need to take. And so there's so much information about it that you actually don't know anymore what to believe and what is actually accurate. But consumers are reacting to it in the way that they are looking for those sources of information which they trust. And finally, when we look at China and we talk to our colleagues in China, they're telling us that there is an incredible reaction to positive messaging by brands from the consumer end, and that brands that offer support to these consumers in one way or another are helping them. And so even if the consumer is taking action for all against all these measures that the government is asking of us, there is still a need for brands to bring reassurance and to comfort consumers within that. It also has an impact, obviously, on media behavior. If you look at confinement, confinement has brought us, and these are some graphs that we took from SIM and Global Web Index. What we've seen is in the past few weeks, TV viewership has increased incredibly, like sometimes reaching to a reach of 60%, which is incredibly high in this period. And when we look at digital, we see the same evolution. So people are getting online right now. But what is also important is to know that the trusted sources of information are basically those sources that bring local strong news. I don't think that the news or journal has been watched as much as it has been in the last few weeks. On the downside, obviously, when people are homebound, there is an incredible decrease in commute, and this affects other media channels like radio and out of home, which is a pity because these are also media that can drive people to stores and that are good touch points to rely on for promotions, and also obviously those channels that are related strongly related to social activity like cinema is having a very, very tough time. A final point on media behavior that I want to share is that when we talk about the homebound economy, is that it drives a lot of e-commerce. We've seen that non-food goods over the past few over weeks, sorry, have increased by a factor 2 or 3, and these are figures sent to us by Google. And some industries are even exceeding these figures, like the entertainment industry. There is no industry that you want to be in like gaming for the moment. Gaming industry is booming. If you look at figures from streaming service Twitch, we see that the viewership has risen for about more than 10%, some games even 40%. And brands are reacting to it. In the gaming industry, we see that, for instance, Ubisoft has advanced its spring sales and is also giving allowing people to play their blockbuster game freely. So the entertainment industry as such is booming at this point in time. Now, what you want to do as an industry, and within that, what you want to do as a specific brand depends obviously in which context you are. The context in which you are, if we dig deeper into the ability to sell and add a notion of touch points, and we split the physical presence in stores and digital presence or digital presence in your ability to sell, then it shapes basically where you are. And here you see how we see the different industries evolve. But obviously, it's a nice exercise for yourself to have a look at, do you believe that your industry is in there? And if so, do you believe that you are somewhere else or in the exact same spot as your competitors? Now, for each and every of these sorry quadrants, we've developed a sort of job to be done. That's the JTBD abbreviation, and this context will actually reveal what you need to do. If you're able to sell, whether it's in physical or in digital point of sales, basically you're in a good spot because you can continue doing business as usual, so to say. And how you do that as a brand is to make sure that you capture a lot of share of voice within your category and transform this share of voice to make your share of market increase. Now, how do you do that in media? Obviously, you're going to focus on those trusted sources of information, in particular. TV and local online news, because they have local resonance but also very high reach to resonate on. And also adding digital and social media in particular would be a sensible choice, because through these media you'll, let's say, empower them to go and buy your brands and products. If we then take away the digital presence and say that your brand, your products or services are only available in a physical store, then what we would recommend brands to do is to think about building and developing their memory structures by being or by sharing very distinctive communication assets. Why do we say that? It's because that if you use within that, you use media as a memorization tool like TV, for instance, that allow you to keep on passing the visual message over and over again, and that you add social media to the loop to make sure you get the communication and your relation going with your consumer. You keep that conversation high, which is quite important to keep to keep yourself top of mind in their minds. Another point that you can add to that is, if you're not able to digitally sell your products, then you might envisage to um, strike partnerships with e-commerce enabled services, or think about your own e-commerce platforms. The third part, the third quadrant, is obviously the more gloomy one, the most frightful one, is when you're actually not able to sell at all, when you're in both physical and digital absence. Now, for these brands, there is sort of an opportunity by focusing on the long term. And what we've seen is that certain brands are doing pretty fine by entertaining and comforting consumers. Just gave the example of the gaming industry, but also in joining the fight against COVID-19. We've seen a lot of very nice examples, for instance, from the brewery industry, where a lot is taken into action to make sure that bar owners are still supported. We've seen lingerie brands producing masks and delivering it to healthcare workers. We've seen the perfume industry making hand gels for hygiene, which is kind of a good move too. And so basically in media, there's no such thing as pushing this message in a very harsh and push way, but think about making sure that you focus on digital entertaining content. So push this content digitally, and obviously talk to your PR people to make these activations more worth it and to show the brand involvement to consumers. And finally, when we talk about digital presence and physical absence, there's a need for a reorientation, and a reorientation in the sense that you're going to go to direct to consumers, so making sure that you can actually get your products immediately to those consumers by being first easy to buy, so easy to buy to the ones that already know you, that already have you in your consideration set, by, for instance, focusing on the quality of your CRM, but also getting noticed, and getting noticed especially on the digital channels. So basically, you want to be in proximity of your point of sales, for instance, your e-commerce platforms, but also increase your online visibility. And this you can actually do also with online video. And what we see is that in this part of the quadrant, the importance of actionable and giving actionable information to your consumers about your products and services is a very sensible way to go. So think about the hub and hygiene content that you might want to share. In the end, taking the actions will allow for a better relevance of your brand to your consumer and resonance, obviously, by doing three things. You will empower your consumers because you're gonna have them or help them in giving the tools to face the service interruption and shortages that there are. Second of all, you're gonna empathize with them. You're gonna make sure to show support and empathy from your side, and to show, like we see for a lot of initiatives on for the healthcare workers. Sorry, and a last point is the very thin line between, or let's say a thin ethical line between giving people commercial information and infotaining them. So making sure that we bring this information in a very honest and genuine tone of voice. And basically, with these three pillars of communication towards consumers, what we can say is that brands that will have shown that they made an effort to show the greater good and empathize and empower and infotain will actually focus on their purpose and will be the ones that will be recognized afterwards. And so this is actually when the four phases, four contexts that we put forward in the ability to sell. But obviously, when you're not able to sell, it's also important, as we said, to keep your mental availability high. And I think Wim has something to tell about that.
Yes, thank you, Thibaud. So yeah, so in recessions, in crises, brands go silent because they have to, because they are in a bad cash flow position and they can't afford to spend money on advertising. That's of course okay. But if you have the cash flow, if you have the money, then it's better to maintain your mental availability. There's plenty of research from Peter Field, Les Binet from the IPA, Millward Brown, Kantar. There's plenty of research that has proven that in periods of recession or crises, if you keep your mental availability up, because you keep your advertising spend up, then you get stronger out of it. There's plenty, as I said, plenty of research. I just mentioned one graph. It's the first graph. You see TBCA decline and TBCA flat or increase. So that is your total brand awareness. That of course drops if you don't spend, and your total and stays flat if you spend or increase. And so this is what you see on your brand health metric. So if you decline, or if you go silent or go dark, then total mentions go down, buy nowadays goes down, buy most often goes down, first mention go down, total brand awareness go down, and trial goes down. Now, if you keep your advertising spend flat or increase, and there's a increasing your advertising spend might be intelligent, again, if you have the money, when your competitors are staying silent. And then you see that's the green bars, you see what happens. Your total brand awareness goes up, your trial goes up. Anyway, so plenty of research to show, that's just one piece, to show that if you keep your mental availability up, you're going to get stronger out of the crisis than brands or your competitors that don't do that. Of course, as I said, you need to have the money for it. So if you have cash flow problems, you probably won't be able to do that. But then there's another thing. And this is the first time that this happens. And that is that consumers are actively asking brands to step in. And it's part of a bigger trend that's happening in society. And that's something that we will discuss in the next webinar. So next week, we're going to deep dive into this because, as I said, it's new and it's the first time. So next week, same day, same time, we're going to deep dive into it. Because, as I said, it's unique, it's the first time. And it is because people don't think that governments are capable enough to get the crisis under control. Why is that? And a little bit background on the deeper trend. If you look at the top 100 of economic entities in the world, 70% of them are businesses and only 30% are countries. And everybody knows that, not the numbers, but everybody knows that businesses have much more money, have better leadership, etc., etc. And so people trust businesses more than they trust governments to solve this. And so what people are asking is, please get in, please help us to manage this, to handle this. And that's why you see companies coming in, and you have plenty of companies that do donations. But there's also, there's another thing that consumers ask is not only, step in and give us money and solve the crisis. The other thing that they ask is, please help us keep our spirits up. And this is what I think is the phase that we go in now, because if you listen to the news, yesterday all of a sudden they talked about strikes. Police talks about strikes. Supermarkets. People, and that's, of course, it's normal because it's about security and about fear. But you feel that the grumbling is coming up. People are a little bit bored. They have to stay in. The morale goes down. All of a sudden, the discussion on do we need to wear masks or not? It's all about that. And so I think lifting up spirits is something that consumers are asking, and which we have had the phase of donations. Now I think we're going to get into the second phase and help people keep the morale. It's going to be really very important, and brands are in a good spot to do that. If you want to have examples of how brands are doing it for now on the blog, you will already find the presentation on the deep dive, and the second part you will have 30 plus brands, examples of 30 plus brands that are responding to the consumer and actively are stepping in. It's what you see now. There's not so much about the second phase yet because that needs to start. Brands have an active an active role to play, and so and that will help to keep your mental availability up, which is necessary if you want to get out of this crisis stronger than your competition. Thibaud. Oh no, it's me. Sorry. So this is a little bit it for now. So what we want to discuss was One is scenario planning. So it's very difficult to plan scenarios now because we have no idea how long it's going to take and what's going on, and will we have new outbreaks or not. So it's all very difficult, but then that's one of the reasons we started this blog. The more insights and the more people, marketeers, can talk to each other and share opinions, the better it's going to be. Secondly, we talked about the 4 phases that the consumers are going to go through. Phase one, crisis time, back to business, back to normal, and then beyond. And then we talked about if you're open for business, what are the different things that you can do. And then if you're not open for business, it's very important to keep, it's normal to cut spendings and keep silent, but it's very important that you keep your mental availability up, because it has proven over and over and over again that in times of crisis, the ones that keep the mental availability up get out stronger out of this crisis. All right, Thibaud.
Yeah. Before we step into the Q&A, maybe just like you already said, what's the next step in the brand recovery series? So as Wim already said, next week we will have another webinar on doing good now to do well in the post-COVID-19 recession, the content of which you can already find on our blog. And then we're going to obviously dive in the different phases in the weeks to come that we discussed earlier. So the back to business, the back to normal, the preparing for beyond, and such. So kindly send you to our blog if in the meantime you need some information. And I suggest that we're going through some questions. I think there are 2 questions came about.
Yeah, we have a few, and the 2 most interesting ones. There's a very interesting one because we are in Belgium. Most of the decisions are handled internationally. How could you help us convince that the cash flow that is available, that they shouldn't spend that only on the bigger markets, France, Germany, etc., etc.? That's a really good question. It's also a difficult question because it's normal for international companies to concentrate on the bigger markets. Make your business case. Make your business case. We are helping some brands now to do small stuff, not so expensive, or not expensive enough to be on the radar of the international. Try something out, and if you keep it not so expensive, then if it fails, then nobody will notice. But so try stuff, try ideas. If you see that they pick up, you have your business case, and then you can go to international and say, listen, we have something here. It's getting picked up. International will not say, shut it down. They will not, because it's important. If it's important today, if you get something, if you have something that is well, where consumers respond well to, international will never say you have to stop it. So do small stuff, see what happens, and if you have something that wins, then make your business case, go into international, and you will get the money. Another really interesting question, consumer asking brands to step in and help. What is the value of brands trying to commercialize this? Example, one brand is all over the internet making cars available for hospitals, or another brand is sending presents to hospitals, and then scream it out on social that they're doing that. Isn't there a risk of that this will turn against the brand? Yes. There's a very fine line now, and authenticity is what's going to keep you at the right side of this fine line. There are some brands that are, talking very loud about what they do, and all of a sudden, and sometimes you're like, this is a bit too loud for what it is. So it's okay, it's okay to talk about what you're doing. Sometimes it's not so okay to scream it out really loud, because then it's no longer authentic, and then people understand that this is just another form of product advertising, and I think you need to keep away from that, because um, there's this saying that says, what brands do today will be remembered for years to come. uh, and yes, so you have to support your consumers, you have to support people, because brands are asking for it, but you have to do it in a authentic and a smart way, and don't cross the line, because if you cross the line, people will remember that too.
Mhm. I think the third question is exactly the same thing that you just said. It's
Yes.
about
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right, Thibaud.
yeah, the maybe a last question with mental availability. So yeah, mental availability is more than just awareness. It's making sure that it's, let's say, awareness that lingers, and that makes sure that you can keep the brands in the consideration set. So make sure that uh, you're not just focusing on awareness, but keep yourself top of mind, and make sure that you're the first brand in the consideration set when business kicks in again, and you're able to buy. So that's what we mean with mental availability.
All right, so
Okay.
this is it. So this is the first webinar. We hope you find it you have found it useful. So the deck is on the blog. Next week, the same time, same day, we're going to talk about what I just said. So how brands can step in and help, and you can already, if you need examples, they're also on the blog. So this is it. So thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you very much. And if there's anything, we're here.
Okay, bye.
Bye.